The school auditorium always had a strange smell, something between old wood, stage dust, and that faint hint of cafeteria pizza that somehow traveled through every hallway, but tonight none of that mattered. The place was alive. Bright stage lights hummed overhead like restless stars, glittering across the sea of parents, students, and teachers filling every seat. It was the night of the annual Ridgeway High Talent Showcase, an event usually remembered more for awkward dance routines and off-key singing than anything impressive, but this year, a rumor had swept through the student body. Someone unexpected had signed up. The name printed on the very last line of the sign-up sheet, scribbled in messy handwriting that barely stayed inside the box, was Ethan Miller Elvis impersonation. Just for fun. People laughed as soon as they saw it. Ethan, the quiet kid from junior year history, the one who sat near the window every day, doodling guitars in his notebook instead of talking to anyone, that Ethan, the idea of him doing an Elvis impression was almost unbelievable. But Ethan was backstage now, very real, very alive, and very, very nervous. He stood alone near the dusty curtain, gripping a sparkly rhinestone-covered jacket that looked like it belonged on a Vegas stage in the 1970s, not in a high school in the middle of nowhere. The jacket hung loosely over his arm, its sequins catching the dim backstage lights and scattering tiny reflections across the floor. It was old, older than Ethan himself, with a faint smell of cologne and memories stitched into every seam. It had been his grandfather's, his favorite jacket, his lucky jacket. Ethan swallowed hard and ran his thumb over one of the metal studs. Just touching it brought back a flood of images. Summer afternoons on the porch, his grandfather strumming an old guitar, his raspy voice singing those Elvis classics with a grin wide enough to light up the whole block. "Remember this, kid," Grandpa used to say, tapping the side of his head. "Music ain't about perfection, it's about heart. Anybody can sing a note, not everybody can make someone feel something." Ethan blinked away the memories, but they kept coming. They always did. His grandfather had been the one good constant in his life. When his mom worked double shifts at the diner, when bills piled up on the kitchen table, when loneliness crept in like winter cold, his grandfather filled the empty spaces with warmth. With music, with love. But now that voice was gone. That porch was quiet, and Ethan felt more alone than ever. He hadn't planned on performing tonight. He hadn't even planned on signing up. The idea had started between classes when his friends, Alex, Jordan, and Miguel, jokingly dared him to put his name on the list. They didn't think he would actually do it. They also didn't know about the jacket. Or the promise Ethan whispered the night his grandfather passed away, while holding the old man's hand in the dim hospital room. "I'll sing for you someday. I don't know when, but I will." Weeks went by. Then months. Life got busy, grief got heavy, and Ethan pushed the promise into the back of his mind. Until that dare. Until the moment he saw that talent show sheet on the wall, and without thinking, picked up the pen. Even he wasn't sure why he wrote Elvis impersonation. Maybe it was impulse, maybe courage, maybe desperation, maybe the universe giving him a nudge. But now that he was backstage, heart pounding like a drum solo, Ethan wondered if he'd made a huge mistake. He peeked through the side of the curtain. The auditorium looked enormous from this angle, every seat filled, students leaning forward with phones ready to record, judges whispering to each other at the long table near the stage, kids from the football team elbowing each other, already smirking in anticipation of his act. He could almost hear their laughter before he'd even stepped out. A cold sweat prickled down his back. "What am I doing?" he whispered to himself. His voice trembled. "No one wants to hear me sing." His mind played through every doubt like a cruel slideshow. He wasn't popular. He wasn't confident. He wasn't the kind of person who stood in the spotlight. He had no stage experience. He only sang when he was alone, late at night, in the garage, strumming his grandfather's guitar while the world slept. The idea of singing in front of hundreds of people made his stomach twist. Just then, a group of performers rushed past him. 2 girls with glittery microphones, a boy juggling basketballs, and a kid wearing a magician's cape that was definitely too long for him. They were laughing, cheering each other on, buzzing with excitement. Ethan felt like an outsider in a place he didn't belong. A voice came from behind him. "Ethan, you're up in 5, said Mrs. Green, the drama teacher. Holding her clipboard like it was a lifeline. She offered him a kind smile, the kind teachers give when they sense a student is burning up from the inside. "You nervous?" He nodded. Mrs. Green touched his shoulder gently. "Just breathe, and remember, this stage, it's yours for the next 3 minutes. Whatever you do, do it with heart, heart." There was that word again. Ethan took a shaky breath. His hands trembled as he slipped his arms into the rhinestone jacket. It was too big for him, wide in the shoulders, loose around the waist, but the weight of it felt grounding, familiar, like an embrace from the past. The moment the jacket settled on him, something inside shifted, something small but real. He closed his eyes, feeling the fabric against his skin, the faint scent of cologne that still lingered like a ghost. He could almost hear his grandfather's voice. "You got this, kid." Ethan opened his eyes, the curtain rustled, the lights flickered. The MC called his name over the microphone. Next up, Ethan Miller, performing an Elvis impression. The crowd laughed. Softly at first, then louder. Phones lifted. Someone shouted, "Let's go, Elvis." Ethan's pulse raced, but instead of crumbling, he pressed a hand over the jacket over his heart, and whispered, "This is for you, Grandpa." And as he took that first step toward the stage, the joke stopped being a joke. Ethan stepped into the light. It hit him like warm, blinding sunshine, the kind that makes your eyes water even when you're not sad. His footsteps echoed softly against the wooden stage floor as he walked to the microphone, each step heavier than the last. The rhinestone jacket glittered under the stage lights, making him look unintentionally flashy, a sparkly contrast to the trembling boy inside it. From the other side of the stage, the audience erupted. But not in applause, laughter. It rolled through the auditorium in waves light at first, then louder, spreading row by row. It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of laughter people give when they don't expect much, when they think the next few minutes will be nothing more than a harmless joke. Ethan's heart squeezed inside his chest. He forced a smile to hide the sting. He adjusted the oversized sunglasses, though they felt heavier now, like they were shielding more than just his eyes. The microphone stood tall in front of him, a silver tower that suddenly felt impossible to conquer. On the judges' panel, 3 adults exchanged amused, polite smiles. Mrs. Rivera, the music teacher, leaned toward the middle judge, the PE coach, and whispered something that made him chuckle. The third judge, Ms. Fletcher from the front office, just folded her arms, clearly expecting another silly teenage act. Someone from the audience shouted, "Give us the hips, Elvis," and more laughter. Ethan swallowed hard. He could feel his throat tighten, a familiar, terrible feeling, like his voice was retreating, hiding deep inside him. He'd felt this before, in class, when he tried to speak but couldn't find the volume. At lunch, when he sat quietly, pretending he didn't hear the whispers. At home, after his grandfather passed away. He knew what fear felt like. He also knew what running away felt like. He took one more step toward the mic. His hand shook as he reached up and adjusted it. The metal was cold, and the sound of it sliding up the stand echoed across the silent pockets between laughs. He could walk off. He could fake a cough. He could say it was a joke all along, but something inside him whispered, "Heart, kid, heart." He remembered his grandfather's voice, low, warm, full of soul. He remembered sitting in the living room as a child, listening to Elvis records on an old turntable that skipped every few songs. His grandfather sang with such passion, even when nobody was around to hear it. "Why sing so loud when it's just us?" Ethan once asked. His grandfather smiled, because music deserves to be felt, even if it's only by one person. Ethan closed his eyes now. Just for a moment, he pretended the auditorium was empty. He pretended he was home. He pretended Grandpa was still here, The laughter began to fade beneath the thudding of his heartbeat. He took a deep breath, stepped closer to the microphone, and opened his mouth. The first note slipped out like a tremor, soft, uncertain, but carrying something unmistakably real. It wasn't loud, it wasn't polished, but it was honest. The laughter stopped, almost instantly, as if someone had pressed pause. Ethan's voice, rich with trembling emotion, hung in the air like a fragile thread. The crowd leaned in without realizing it. Even the kids who normally cracked jokes in class froze, their smirks melting into something closer to awe. It wasn't the Elvis voice they expected. It wasn't an impression. It was something deeper, a voice shaped by loss, a voice shaped by love, a voice that carried the weight of every memory he'd been holding in his chest. His eyes slowly opened, and he saw the audience differently now. They were no longer laughing. Their faces had softened, their bodies still, their attention captured by something they hadn't expected from the quietest boy in school. Ethan took another breath and continued. He sang the first line in a tone that felt raw, gentle trembling around the edges but full of soul. His voice had a slight roughness to it, like a scratch on an old vinyl record, but that roughness made it feel real, authentic. He wasn't trying to be Elvis, he wasn't trying to be impressive, he was just trying to be him. On the judge's table, Mrs. Rivera's eyes widened. The coach leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. Ms. Fletcher adjusted her glasses as if she needed a clearer view. The entire energy of the room shifted. Ethan felt it. It scared him, but it strengthened him too. With each line, his voice grew steadier. He let the lyrics shape the pain and gratitude inside him, the memories of porch, side songs, of hospital rooms, of promises whispered through tears. The room stayed silent. A silence so absolute it was deafening, a silence packed with emotion, confusion, admiration, and maybe even a little guilt from those who had laughed moments before. Ethan had never known he could hold a room like this. He had never known he could feel this much while singing. Halfway through the verse, a girl in the front row slowly lowered her phone, not because she didn't want to record, but because recording something felt suddenly inappropriate. Sacred, a boy in the back rubbed his eyes discreetly. Another leaned forward, elbows on his knees, as if trying to get closer to the sound. Ethan's voice slipped into a higher note, thin but beautiful. It wavered for a moment, then settled like a breath finding its rhythm. He found confidence one measure at a time. He thought of his grandfather tapping his foot, humming along. He imagined him saying, "Sing it like you mean it, kid." And he did. The entire auditorium was held in place by the weight of a single, unexpected voice, a voice no one had seen coming from the awkward boy in the glittery jacket. As the chorus approached, Ethan's hands unclenched. His shoulders dropped. He felt a strange warmth spread through him, something that felt like being seen, being heard. The smirks were gone, the laughter forgotten. Every eye on him now reflected something else, respect. Emotion, connection. The transformation was stunning. What began as mockery had turned into a moment of truth, a moment of shared humanity. By the time he reached the final note of the chorus, the silence in the room wasn't empty. It was full of feeling, full of awe, full of the power of a voice that wasn't meant to impress, but to heal, to honor, to love. And as that last note lingered in the air, vibrating gently like a heartbeat, Ethan realized something. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the stage, not of the crowd, not of being himself. Because for the first time, he wasn't hiding behind silence or fear. He was standing in the spotlight, shining with honesty, and the entire room was standing still. The first verse had quieted the room, but it was the next part, the heart of the song, where Ethan truly stepped into who he was. The auditorium seemed to shrink as he sang, the walls folding inward until the world felt small enough to hold in the palm of his hand. The lights softened, the murmurs faded. Even the air felt still, as if the entire school had paused just to listen. Ethan wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere between the first and second verse, he forgot about the audience. He forgot about the judges. He forgot about the kids who had laughed when he walked on stage. He wasn't singing for them, he was singing for one person, Grandpa. The second verse slid from his lips like a confession. Soft, aching, honest. Each word carried a piece of him, a memory, a moment he thought he'd buried. He saw it as clearly as if it were happening again. His grandfather sitting on their back porch, the wooden boards creaking under his rocking chair. The sun sinking low behind their yard, casting a golden haze over everything. A radio beside him playing old Elvis songs, static buzzing faintly between tracks. Ethan, 10 years old, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a juice box, swinging his legs to the beat. "Come on, kid," Grandpa had said, tapping his knee to the rhythm. "Feel the music, don't just hear it." Ethan had laughed, trying to mimic the king's famous lip curl, like this. Grandpa had thrown his head back and laughed. "Not bad. You'll be stealing the spotlight soon enough." But Ethan never believed him. He wasn't the spotlight type. And as he sang now in front of hundreds of people, he wondered if his grandfather had somehow known this moment would come. If he had somehow known that Ethan's heart was full of songs waiting to be sung, even if Ethan himself didn't realize it. The memories flooded him as he moved deeper into the song. He remembered the nights Grandpa would sit with him, when he couldn't sleep, singing softly, until Ethan's breathing slowed, until the nightmares melted away. He remembered the sound of Grandpa's deep laugh echoing through the house when Ethan tried to sing along, always a little off key, but always with passion. He remembered the last time they had sung together. It was in the hospital room, the air thick with disinfectant and sadness. Machines beeped softly beside the bed. Grandpa's voice was weak, barely more than a whisper, but his eyes sparkled when Ethan picked up the old guitar and placed it gently in his trembling hands. "Play it, kid," Grandpa had said, one more time. Ethan had played the opening chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love," his fingers shaking so badly he almost missed the notes, but Grandpa didn't care. He smiled a tired, soft smile and sang the first few lines before his voice cracked and faded. Ethan finished the song alone, and now, standing on stage months later, he realized he was finishing it again. The crowd didn't know this story. They didn't know him. They didn't know why his voice wavered on certain words, or why his hands trembled between chords. But they felt it, the raw truth woven into every line. By the middle of the song, Ethan stopped caring about being perfect. He let emotion guide him instead. He closed his eyes and leaned into the microphone, letting the lyrics carry him like a river flows. The note came out stronger than he expected. It surprised him, a burst of confidence breaking through the cracks of his fear. "Surely to the sea." His voice warmed, deepened, steadied. The auditorium felt warmer too, like the music itself wrapped a comforting arm around everyone in the room. "Darling, so it goes." At this line, he opened his eyes. He saw faces he never expected to see moved: a football player wiping his cheek, a girl clasping her hands under her chin, a teacher pressing her fingertips to her lips. Even the judges weren't writing anymore, they were listening. Some things. His voice softened, he felt his chest tighten. This part always hit him hardest, are meant to be, that line, that truth. That ache, the ache of loving someone who wasn't here anymore. His voice cracked just slightly, but it wasn't a mistake. It was honesty. It was grief breaking through the melody, shaping it into something beautiful. He kept singing. The music swelled in the background, a simple instrumental track, but right now it sounded like a full orchestra. Not because it was loud, but because Ethan's heart amplified it. He reached the emotional center of the song, the place his grandfather always said makes the magic happen. "Take my hand." His fingers brushed the rhinestones on his jacket. "Take my whole life too." His breath trembled. He let it, his voice wavered, he let it, his heart ached, he let it. "For I." He swallowed hard. This was the moment, this was the note. "Can't help." He closed his eyes again. Sound vibrated through him, soft at first, then stronger, then full. He let everything inside him pour into the final line. "Falling in love with you." It wasn't just singing, it was releasing grief, releasing loneliness, releasing the guilt of not saying good, by the way he wanted. And as he held the last note, long and trembling but beautiful, something in the room changed. A quiet sniffle echoed, then another, then another. People shifted in their seats not out of boredom, but because they were trying to subtly wipe tears with their sleeves. He saw a mother in the second row take her daughter's hand. A teacher rested a hand on his heart. Two friends in the back leaned their heads together gently. Ethan didn't know it, but he had just opened a door inside every person, a door to their own memories of love, loss, family, hope. Finally the music faded. Ethan's voice softened to a whisper. The last note floated into the air like a fragile bubble, glowing, delicate, full of meaning. He let it go. When silence followed, it wasn't empty. It was sacred, it was full, as if everyone in the room had taken the same breath and held it, honoring something they didn't fully understand but deeply felt. Ethan lowered the microphone slowly. His eyes glistened in the light. He didn't smile, he didn't bow. He simply stood there breathing, feeling the weight and relief of a heart finally spoken aloud. For the first time since his grandfather passed away, he didn't feel alone. For a breathless moment after the music faded, the auditorium stood frozen as if time itself were holding its breath alongside Ethan. Then, something remarkable happened. A single clap echoed from the back row. Sharp, loud, and unexpected. Ethan's eyes flicked in its direction, startled. Before he could even process it, another clap followed. Then another, and another. Within seconds, applause spread through the entire auditorium like wildfire, erupting with a force that shook him to his core. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the good job kind students give out of obligation. It was something deeper, louder, more emotional. It was real. People were standing, students who never stood for anything school-related, parents with shining eyes, teachers who had known Ethan for years but had never seen him this way. Even the football players who had laughed earlier were clapping, their long arms raised high above their heads. The standing ovation grew, filling the room with warmth, appreciation, and something Ethan had never felt before, honor. He blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be good. It was a joke, a dare, a moment he thought would end in humiliation. Yet here he was, soaking in the sound of applause rising like a tide, powerful enough to drown out every fear, every insecurity, every moment of doubt he'd carried for years. On the judges' panel, Mrs. Rivera wiped a tear from her cheek. She wasn't trying to hide it. She let the emotion show openly, her expression full of admiration. Coach Stevens, usually stern and unimpressed by anything unrelated to sports, leaned forward, clasping his large hands together as he shook his head in disbelief. Ms. Fletcher removed her glasses, cleaning them with a tissue, though everyone could see she wasn't wiping the lenses. She was wiping tears. Ethan's breath caught. He wasn't imagining it. He hadn't dreamed the applause. This was real, but the moment wasn't over. The MC, a senior named Chloe, walked back onto the stage, her eyes wide and glossy. She held her cue cards, but she didn't look at them. Instead, she looked at Ethan like she was seeing him for the first time. She stepped up to the mic, "Ladies and gentlemen." Her voice cracked and she had to clear her throat. That was one of the most beautiful performances we've ever had in this auditorium. More applause. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. He slowly stepped back from the microphone, unsure of what to do with his hands or his face or his emotions. He felt exposed in the most vulnerable, powerful way. Chloe gently guided him toward the judge's table. Even the walk felt surreal, like floating. He stopped in front of the judges, clutching the rhinestone jacket with one hand and rubbing his thumb across the seam, as if grounding himself in the memory of his grandfather. Mrs. Rivera leaned in first. "Ethan," she paused, struggling to keep her composure. "I've been teaching music for 23 years, and I don't say this lightly. Your performance tonight was extraordinary." She placed a hand over her heart. "The emotion in your voice, the honesty, you didn't just sing, you shared a piece of your soul, and we felt it." Ethan swallowed hard, unable to speak. Coach Stevens nodded firmly. "Son, I never thought an Elvis song would make me emotional." He let out a breathy laugh. "But you did it. You made this whole room feel something that takes guts, even MS." Fletcher smiled, a rare, gentle smile that softened her entire face. "Thank you for reminding us what music is meant to do." Ethan felt warmth spread through him from his chest to his fingertips. Then came the unexpected moment, the one that changed everything. Mrs. Rivera stepped away from the table, rounded the side, and approached him slowly. "Ethan," she said softly, "can I ask, who taught you to sing like that?" A lump rose in his throat. He hesitated, then whispered, "My grandpa." She nodded, her eyes softening even further. "He must have loved you very much." Ethan felt tears sting at the corners of his eyes. "He did," he whispered. "And I miss him." The auditorium grew silent again, not heavy, just tender. Mrs. Rivera placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I think he heard you tonight." Ethan's chest tightened. He inhaled sharply, trying not to crumble on stage. But the comment hit something deep inside him, a place where love and grief intertwined so tightly he could barely breathe. But then, something completely unplanned happened. From the back row, someone shouted, "Encore!" The room erupted. "Encore! Encore! Encore!" The chant rose like a wave, voices blending together until it felt like the whole school was calling his name. Ethan froze. He hadn't prepared a second song. He hadn't even expected to make it halfway through the first one. His mind spun in circles, overwhelmed and confused. I don't," he stuttered, stepping back. Mrs. Rivera smiled knowingly. "You don't have to if you don't want to. This moment is already perfect." But something inside him shifted. A spark, a courage he didn't know he had. Ethan turned toward the audience. They were still standing, still clapping, still chanting, not for a joke, not for an impersonation, for him. He remembered something his grandfather used to say, "When life calls you, even if you're scared, answer with your heart." Ethan swallowed, lifted the mic again, and whispered into it, I can sing one more." The auditorium exploded with cheers. Ethan took a shaky breath and searched the stage floor with his foot. He tapped twice, a habit from years of watching his grandfather start a song. He closed his eyes. He didn't choose a flashy song. He didn't choose a loud one. He chose the lullaby his grandfather used to sing when Ethan was little, a soft, tender tune almost no one in the room would recognize, but he didn't care. This wasn't for them. This was for the man who taught him how to love music, and who taught him what it meant to sing with heart. He began softly, barely above a whisper. The auditorium leaned in again, falling quiet enough to hear the hum of the stage lights. His voice was fragile but beautiful, carrying a warmth that wrapped around every person in the room like a blanket. Parents held their children closer. Teachers rested their hands on their desks. Students who had never been quiet in their lives fell completely still. Ethan sang with love, he sang with memory, he sang with everything in him, and when he finished, when the last note drifted into silence, the auditorium didn't erupt this time. It breathed, soft, unified. Moved beyond words. Then, slowly, applause rose again, gentle this time, as if the audience feared clapping too loudly might break the moment. Ethan bowed his head, overwhelmed. Tonight wasn't supposed to be special. He wasn't supposed to shine. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it did, because sometimes the most unexpected moments become the ones that change everything. The auditorium fell so silent, it felt like the world itself stopped to breathe. The judges sat frozen, hands half raised, eyes locked on Jake, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, hundreds of people suspended in a moment where laughter had turned into awe, where a joke had become something sacred. And Jake felt it. For the first time in his life, he felt seen. He stood there on the stage, chest rising and falling beneath the white fabric of his Elvis suit. The ridiculous fake rhinestones glimmered under the spotlights, but they didn't look ridiculous anymore. They looked earned. They looked like a costume that finally matched the truth of the man wearing it. Jake swallowed. His throat burned from singing. His knees trembled, and yet he'd never felt stronger. Behind the curtain to the right, he could see the wheelchair. His mother watching from the wings, her hands shaky, her eyes filled with something he had only ever hoped to see, pride. Slowly, as if waking from a trance, the judges rose to their feet. One by one, first the strict judge, the one who never smiled, then the comedian judge with tears in her eyes, then the heart of Gold judge who placed a hand over her chest, and then the audience stood too. The applause didn't explode, it bloomed. Like a wave rising from the back rows, rolling toward the stage, growing, until it crashed into thunder. People clapped, whistled, cheered, shouted his name, Jake, Elvis, encore. Jake blinked rapidly, trying to understand. Moments ago, before he sang, they had been laughing at him. Now, they were lifted by him. They were holding on to every breath he took. He looked at his trembling hands. All his life, he had believed he was meant to hide, meant to keep quiet, meant to settle. He had convinced himself he wasn't talented enough, wasn't interesting enough, wasn't anything enough. But here, right now, he felt like he belonged. The host rushed on stage, eyes wide with excitement. "Jake, that was absolutely unbelievable. How do you feel?" Jake opened his mouth, but the words got stuck behind the lump in his throat. He turned toward his mother, who was wheeling herself forward with the help of a staff member. Their eyes met, and that broke him. He pressed a hand to his face, overwhelmed, laughing and crying at the same time. His mom reached the side of the stage, tears flowing freely. "You sounded just like him," she whispered, not shouting, not projecting. Somehow he heard her anyway. "You sounded like hope." Jake stepped toward her, dropping to his knees, white rhinestones catching the light as he leaned in and gently pressed his forehead to hers. "For you," he murmured. "Everything I've ever done, every shift at the diner, every night practicing alone, it's all for you." She cupped his face in both hands, fragile but full of warmth. "And look at you now," she said. "You finally did something for yourself." Jake inhaled sharply, because she was right. For the first time in years, he had done something just because he loved it, because he wanted to feel alive, even just for a moment. The host, unable to hold back the excitement, turned to the judges. "Judges, we need to hear from you. What just happened on this stage?" The strict judge spoke first. His reputation for being brutally honest made everyone hold their breath. "Jake," he said, leaning toward the microphone, "I was ready to press my buzzer the moment you walked out. Not because you weren't likable, but because I didn't think you were serious." He paused. "But then, you opened your mouth, and what came out? It wasn't just music. It was truth. It was heart. It was everything this stage was built for." The crowd roared. Jake covered his mouth, shaking his head in disbelief. The comedian judge dabbed at her eyes. "You came out here to make a joke," she said softly, "but something happened the moment you looked toward the wings. I saw it. Everyone saw it. You remembered why you sing, and that why. It cracked us open." The third judge leaned forward. "You didn't imitate Elvis," she said. "You honored him, and you honored the person who made you brave enough to stand here today." The audience cheered again, louder, stronger, warmer. Jake felt a wave of gratitude so heavy he thought it might pull him to the floor. And then the strict judge lifted his hand. "Actually," he said, sliding his fingers over the golden button in front of him, "I think this deserves more than words." The entire auditorium gasped. Jake's mother covered her mouth. He pressed the button. Boom! Golden confetti erupted from the ceiling. Lights burst into gold. The air glittered, shimmering around Jake like he had stepped into a dream he didn't dare believe could ever be real. He fell to his knees as the golden storm poured over him. His mother wheeled herself forward, reaching him, and he pulled her into his arms. Confetti stuck to her hair. She laughed and sobbed at the same time. "You did it," she cried. "Jake, you did it." But he shook his head, hugging her tighter. "No, Mom," he whispered, "we did it." The lights dimmed, the music swelled. The crowd cheered until their voices cracked. Jake looked up through the gold falling from the ceiling, and for the first time in his entire life, he believed he wasn't a joke. He was a story. A story of kindness, sacrifice, unexpected courage, and the kind of love that could turn even a simple Elvis impression into something life-changing, unforgettable, and profoundly human. A story that reminded everyone watching, sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the people who never thought they deserved one.